Question to you is, with lawmakers not being able to agree on even, $30 billion in cuts and this continuous problem of spending and debt and deficit spending, how can we avoid a situation like this where the U.S. stature is really affected, the bond rating, for example?
Well, look, we have to separate two things here. First of all, there is absolutely no risk whatsoever of the United States not being able to pay its debts because its debts are denominated in its own currency, the U.S. dollar, of which it is the issuer. So there is no issue of solvency. There cannot be an issue of solvency. The United States is always going to be able to pay its debts. I think a lot of what is going on here is fear-mongering. Look, if you look at Japan, for example, which had its credit rating downgraded several times by the rating agencies, the 10-year yield on the Japanese government bond, the equivalent of our 10-year Treasury, is yielding 1.5%. So the interest rate will be unaffected. However, I will say this. A lot of people view this, I think, through sort of a prism of misinformation. Some of that misinformation in that piece you just rolled.
What is the misinformation?
I mean, they do believe...
What's the misinformation you feel, Mike?
The misinformation in the sense that a downgrade would lead automatically and necessarily to higher or skyrocketing interest rates. That just isn't true.
Why wouldn't the U.S. have to pay more for its debt if people were concerned about the U.S.'s ability to pay it back? What if the U.S. was threatened as the reserve currency, the U.S. dollar?
Because, as they said in that package, the U.S. has no inability to pay it back because it issues dollars. It could print the dollar to make the payment on the debt. I mean, there's no way that it's not going to be able to make that payment on the debt.
What if the U.S. dollar wasn't the reserve currency anymore? A lot of people talk about that. Even different countries negotiate trades in their own currencies to circumvent the dollar. More and more people are talking about a scenario in which the U.S. dollar wouldn't be the reserve currency anymore.
Japan's yen is not the reserve currency, and their interest rate is 1.5%, and they have debt that is 2.5 to 3 times bigger than what the United States has. And the reason why they're able to have a low interest rate is because the Bank of Japan, the central bank, sets the interest rate low, and their debt is denominated in yen, just as our debt is denominated in dollars. So it's a non-issue. You know, the rating agencies should understand this, but I mean, maybe I'm asking too much.
But then how come they come out with warnings? How come they come out with warnings? Isn't it even politically difficult for them to come out with warnings? Because, I mean, anybody who's doing that is making a name for himself. It's the U.S. Things are political, from what I understand. The
warnings are ridiculous. They are inapplicable to a sovereign nation that issues its own currency. I've had discussions with the rating agencies. Look, these are the same agencies that rated the toxic subprime debt AAA. So, I mean, how do we take them with any level of credibility after that? The fact of the matter is, any country, whether it's the United States, whether it's Japan, whether it's any country that issues its own currency, never has an issue of solvency if its debt is denominated in its own currency. It could always make that payment.
But so then what are we worrying about with the U.S. debt? What are we worrying about then? Why can't we just spend into the $14, $15, $16 trillion and continue on this path? What's the problem? What's the big debate about then?
Well, there's no problem. The debate is that people have a misunderstanding of this. They view the reality in a way which is mired in misconception and myth, and this is pervasive from the common person on the street all the way up to the highest levels of policy, including our own president, who goes out there publicly and says we are out of money. That is an impossibility. The United States of America issues the U.S. dollar. It could spend in any amount that it wants to. The only real issue here, the only thing that we have to consider is whether or not that spending at some point leads to an inflation. And the only way that's going to happen is when the government spends beyond the capacity of the economy to produce. In other words, when every single person in this country who is able to work is working, and when all of our resources are used up and you spend beyond that, that's when you have a sustainable inflation. That's the real issue we should be talking about. That's the question we should be asking ourselves. And frankly, with a 9% unemployment rate and millions of people out of work and industrial capacity far below what our potential is and millions of unsold homes and all this other excess capacity that we have, What we should be doing is increasing demand, and the way that we do that in an economy where most people are trying to cut back their debt is for the government to step in and stimulate demand by spending on infrastructure, on education, on health care, on basic research and development, on transportation, on alternative energy. These are the things we did in the past. These are the things that created the real capital that was passed along from generation to generation. It's what made this country rich, and it's exactly the thing we're not doing now because we've become sidetracked on this nonsensical issue of the government of the United States running out of money when it is an impossibility.
Sidetracked maybe, but at the same time, the U.S. debt was not what it is now at any of those times that we spent, except maybe during World War II when that paid us well because all of our economic rivals were essentially defeated. And you could argue that Iraq and Afghanistan probably won't pay off as well. But Mike Norman debunking all of the conventional wisdom we are hearing about the deficit and debt debate right now going on in Washington. Well, I appreciate you joining us. Sorry, we're all out of time, but we look forward to seeing you again soon.